In the heart of Rome, a city built on history, stands a state no larger than a golf course, yet it holds sway over 1 billion souls. This is the Vatican. To the world, it is the radiant center of the Catholic faith, a place of pilgrimage, prayer, and papal blessings delivered from a famous balcony. But beneath the gilded domes and behind the pristine marble facades, another Vatican exists. A Vatican of shadows and whispers. For 2,000 years, this tiny sovereign state has been a nexus of faith and power. Its influence has shaped empires, crowned kings, and guided the course of Western civilization. But power, especially power that endures for centuries, requires secrets. What lies hidden within its legendary archives? A library so vast its shelves stretch for over 50 miles. Here, letters from monarchs, confessions of saints, and edicts that changed the world are locked away, far from public view. Imagine the weight of history contained within these walls. Documents detailing papal conclaves, records of ancient exorcisms, and perhaps answers to history's most profound mysteries. These are not just papers. They are the memories of an institution that has seen empires rise and fall, a silent witness to the triumphs and turmoil of humanity. The knowledge kept here is a form of power, carefully guarded, its release measured in centuries, not years. The world sees the light of faith, but the Vatican knows the darkness of the past. The greatest secret of all may be the truth of what it costs to keep the faith alive. The Catholic Church is the largest Christian institution in the world, and its headquarters, Vatican City, is both a religious center and a sovereign state. Its origins trace back to the 4th century AD, when Emperor Constantine ordered the construction of the first Christian basilica on what was believed to be the burial site of St. Peter. As centuries passed, the church grew in wealth, influence, and authority. By the time of the Renaissance, it had accumulated enough power and funding to construct the Vatican we recognize today. St. Peter's Basilica, the Sistine Chapel, and the papal palaces that symbolize spiritual authority to millions. But with power comes control, and with control comes secrecy. Deep within Vatican City lies one of the most mysterious archives on the planet, the Vatican Apostolic Archive, formerly known as the Vatican Secret Archive. The name alone has fueled endless speculation. Officially, the term secretum simply means private in Latin. But the reality is far more compelling. Inside these vaults are an estimated 50 miles of shelving, containing documents that span more than 1,000 years, including the private papers of nearly every pope. Access is tightly controlled. Scholars are allowed in only under strict conditions, and crucially, most documents remain sealed until at least 70 years after the end of a pope's reign. Why the delay? The Vatican claims this policy protects historical context and privacy. Critics argue it does something else entirely. It buys time. Time for witnesses to die, time for narratives to settle, time for controversy to cool. And nowhere is this delay more controversial than when it comes to the Second World War. Perhaps no chapter in Vatican history has generated more debate than its relationship with Nazi Germany. During World War II, Pope Pius XII sat at the center of this storm. As pontiff, he maintained official neutrality, governing Vatican City while surrounded by Mussolini's fascist Italy, itself allied with Hitler. Supporters claim neutrality was necessary for survival. Critics say it was moral failure. Some have gone as far as calling Pius XII Hitler's pope, accusing him of anti-Semitism and of turning a blind eye to the Holocaust. For decades, the Vatican's wartime records remained sealed, allowing speculation to flourish. But documents held outside Vatican walls told a disturbing story. In the archives of Santa Maria dell'Anima, an Austrian church connected to the Vatican, historians uncovered records linked to Bishop Alois Hudal. Hudal was an Austrian nationalist and a vocal supporter of the Nazi regime. After the war, He became a key figure in what would later be known as the Ratlins, escape routes that allowed Nazi officials to flee Europe. Letters addressed to Heudel came from some of the most notorious war criminals of the 20th century. Among them was Franz Stangl, commandant of the Treblinka extermination camp, where an estimated 850,000 people were murdered. Stangl wrote asking for help, and he received it. With the backing of a bishop, former Nazis were issued Red Cross travel documents, passed through Italy, and shipped to South America, particularly Argentina, a favored destination for fleeing war criminals. The implication was explosive, yet historians caution against a simple conclusion. While Bishop Heudel clearly aided Nazi escapees, this does not automatically prove that the Vatican as an institution ordered or approved these actions. Some argue that individual clergy acted independently, motivated by fear of communism. To many within the church at the time, Soviet atheism was seen as an existential threat, and Nazism, however brutal, appeared to be its enemy. My enemy's enemy is my friend. Even within the Vatican, Heudel was reportedly mocked and criticized, earning the nickname the Swastika Bishop. And there is another side to the story. A growing number of historians now argue that Pope Pius XII quietly worked against the Nazi regime. They point to evidence that Catholic institutions hid Jews in churches, monasteries, and even inside the Vatican itself, including Castel Gandolfo, the Pope's summer residence. Supporters believe the Pope's silence was strategic, designed to avoid provoking Nazi retaliation that could have cost even more lives. The truth may never be simple, but for the first time, it may finally be examined. Pope Francis announced the early release of Pius XI's wartime archives, nearly a decade ahead of schedule. Historians now have access to millions of documents that may finally clarify the Vatican's role during the Holocaust. The answers could take years to uncover, and they may not be comforting. The Vatican's secrets don't end with history. They extend into finance. At the center of this controversy is the Vatican Bank, officially called the Institute for the Works of Religion. Founded during World War II, the bank exists to manage and distribute money for religious and charitable purposes. At least, that's the official explanation. In reality, the Vatican Bank is one of the least transparent financial institutions in the world. It does not operate like a normal bank. It does not issue mortgages or loans to the public. Its true wealth remains unclear, though estimates place its assets well above $5 billion. And where secrecy and money intersect, conspiracy follows. The Pope who died too soon. In 1978, Pope John Paul I was elected. 33 days later, he was dead. The Vatican announced he had suffered a heart attack, but almost immediately, questions arose. John Paul I had been active, energetic, and deeply committed to reforming the Vatican, particularly its finances. Rumors spread that he intended to expose corruption involving the Vatican Bank, the Italian Banco Ambrosiano, and organized crime. His sudden death became the foundation for one of the most enduring Vatican conspiracy theories, one so compelling it inspired The Godfather Part 3. At the center of the allegations stood Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, the American head of the Vatican Bank, and his alleged ties to organized crime figures. Decades later, those rumors reignited. In 2019, a startling claim emerged. Anthony Raimondi, a U.S. mobster and cousin of Archbishop Marcinkus, confessed that he had traveled to the Vatican in 1978 to help poison Pope John Paul I with cyanide, allegedly to stop him from exposing a billion-dollar financial scheme. The Vatican denies the claim completely, but the damage was done. The Pope's private papers remain sealed until 2048. If the truth exists, it is still locked away. For years after John Paul I's death, another body was found, this time in London. Roberto Calvi, head of Banco Ambrosiano and deeply connected to the Vatican Bank, was discovered hanging beneath Blackfriars Bridge. His pockets were filled with bricks. British authorities initially ruled it a suicide, Few believed it. There were no marks suggesting he climbed the bridge, no brick dust on his hands, and tidal reconstructions showed a boat could have delivered his body directly beneath the bridge. Calvi became known as God's banker, and his death became one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in financial history. Investigations revealed that over $1 billion had vanished from Banco Ambrosiano's accounts. Mafia money, Vatican-linked money, political money. Calvi had allegedly begun blackmailing powerful figures, threatening to expose illegal transactions if they didn't help cover the losses. That list of potential enemies was long. The mafia, political elites, and possibly the Vatican itself. Although no one was ever convicted, the Vatican Bank later paid over $200 million to creditors, a move described as acknowledgement of moral responsibility. Not legal guilt, moral involvement, looking to the heavens. And then there is perhaps the strangest controversy of all. The Vatican operates a state-of-the-art astronomical observatory, not in Rome, but in Arizona. For centuries, the Church has studied the stars to calculate its calendar. But Mount Graham's modern telescope is something else entirely. Its nickname? Lucifer. Officially, it's an acronym. Unofficially, it's fueled speculation that the Church is searching for extraterrestrial life, or something more. Some conspiracy theorists claim the Vatican believes Jesus will return not from heaven, but from the stars. The Church denies this. Jesuit astronomers say their work is focused on meteors, asteroids, and galaxies, including tracking objects that could threaten Earth. Still, the question lingers. Why does the most secretive institution on Earth also watch the skies? What lies beneath? The Vatican insists that science and faith are not enemies. In fact, a Jesuit priest proposed the Big Bang Theory, and Church astronomers openly acknowledge the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe. But protocols exist for what happens if intelligent life is discovered. Who is told first? Whether contact is attempted? How the world is informed? And yet, no one knows what the Vatican would do, unless that answer is already written and locked away deep inside the archives. For centuries, the Vatican has existed as both a spiritual center and a political power. And when an institution survives for nearly 2,000 years, it inevitably accumulates more than faith. It accumulates information, influence, and secrets. Some historians argue that suspicion toward the Vatican has been exaggerated, fueled by fear of the unknown and mistrust of authority. But others believe the truth is far darker, not invented, but carefully buried beneath layers of time, ritual, and silence. The Vatican Apostolic Archive is often described as a historical repository, but critics argue it functions more like a filter, deciding not only what history is preserved, but what version of history is allowed to exist. While scholars are permitted limited access, they only see what they are authorized to see. Entire collections remain sealed for decades, sometimes longer, under the justification of protecting the Church or preventing misinterpretation. This selective access has fueled one of the most enduring beliefs about the Vatican, that the most dangerous knowledge is never destroyed, it is simply locked away. One of the most controversial areas of speculation surrounds the Vatican's role during the Second World War. Officially, the Church maintained neutrality. But neutrality, some argue, is not the same as innocence. Pope Pius XII, who led the Church during the war, has long been accused of knowing more than he admitted. Critics claim he remained silent while atrocities unfolded across Europe. Supporters argue he worked behind the scenes to save lives. But because so many records from that era remained sealed for decades, uncertainty turned into suspicion, and suspicion turned into conspiracy. Some documents outside the Vatican suggest members of the Church assisted Nazi officials after the war, helping them escape Europe through what became known as ratlands. These escape routes allegedly funneled war criminals into South America using false identities and church connections. While the Vatican denies institutional involvement, Individual clergy members were undeniably implicated, raising the question of how much the leadership truly knew. Then there is the claim that the Vatican itself became the target of disinformation. According to former intelligence officials from Eastern Europe, Soviet agencies deliberately spread narratives portraying the Pope as sympathetic to Hitler, hoping to weaken the Church's moral authority during the Cold War. If true, this would mean that even the stories condemning the Vatican may themselves be the result of hidden manipulation. But wartime secrecy is only one layer. Another persistent belief is that the Vatican possesses early Christian writings that contradict modern doctrine, texts that never made it into the Bible, lost Gospels, alternative accounts of Jesus, stories that place Mary Magdalene in a far more central role, or writings that portray early Christianity not as a unified faith, but as a fragmented movement full of competing beliefs. While fragments of such texts have been discovered elsewhere in the world, conspiracy theorists insist the most complete versions are locked inside the archives, because releasing them could destabilize 2,000 years of theology. Then there are the prophecies. In 1917, 3 children in Fatima, Portugal, claimed they were given visions of the future. 2 of those visions were revealed quickly. The third was sealed. For decades, speculation grew that it predicted global catastrophe, the collapse of the Church, or a future war. When the Vatican finally released the third secret in 2000, many felt the explanation was incomplete. They believe what was released was not the full message, and that the most unsettling part remains hidden. And if the Vatican has concealed prophecy, some believe it has concealed technology as well. One of the strangest legends claims the Church once possessed a device capable of observing the past, a machine allegedly developed by a pre-scientist that could view historical events as if watching a recording. Known as the chronovisor, the device was said to have been dismantled and hidden once its implications became too dangerous. No evidence has ever surfaced, but the story persists because it aligns with a broader belief that the Vatican may guard knowledge not meant for the modern world. This belief extends beyond religion into science and even extraterrestrial life. The Vatican operates one of the world's most advanced observatories. Officially, it studies the universe like any other scientific institution. But some question why a religious state would invest so heavily in space observation. Critics speculate the Church may be monitoring phenomena it does not publicly acknowledge, or preparing for a future revelation that would challenge humanity's understanding of God itself. And these secrets aren't confined to ancient history. In 1983, a teenage girl named Emanuela Orlandi disappeared from Rome. Over the years, theories emerged linking her disappearance to organized crime, foreign intelligence agencies, and even Vatican insiders. Leaked documents and anonymous testimonies suggested the Church knew more than it admitted. Investigations stalled, evidence vanished, and the truth remains unresolved. For many, this modern mystery reinforces an uncomfortable idea that secrecy within the Vatican is not just historical, it is ongoing. Beneath the libraries and chapels lie restricted chambers and underground corridors rarely acknowledged publicly. Rooms without labels, vaults without catalogs, spaces that even high-ranking clergy are never permitted to enter. What they contain is unknown, relics, artifacts, documents, or nothing at all. But secrecy itself becomes a message. As more archives slowly open, historians hope to separate myth from reality. Yet, even as access expands, some believe the most important documents will never be released. Not because they are false, but because they are too powerful. Because once revealed, they could reshape how we understand history, faith, and authority. And perhaps that is why the Vatican's greatest secrets remain exactly where they are, hidden. As the world entered the late 20th century, the Vatican faced a new problem it had never truly dealt with before: visibility. Satellite media, leaked documents, and digital communication made secrecy harder to maintain. And with that exposure came scandals that were no longer ancient or theoretical. They were happening in real time. One of the most revealing moments came in 2012, when a series of internal Vatican documents were leaked to the press. This became known as VatiLeaks. The documents exposed private letters written by cardinals and senior officials, revealing corruption, internal sabotage, and power struggles at the very top of the church. They showed allegations of blackmail, favoritism, financial mismanagement, and factions working against one another behind the walls of Vatican City. What shocked observers most wasn't just the content, it was the tone. These were not outsiders accusing the Vatican. These were insiders. The leaks suggested that the Vatican was not a unified spiritual authority, but a fractured political entity, riddled with rivalries and quiet wars over influence and control. The man who leaked the documents was eventually arrested, the Pope's own butler. The Vatican framed the incident as a betrayal. Critics saw it as confirmation. Just 1 year later, something unprecedented happened. Pope Benedict XVI resigned. Officially, his reason was declining health. But resignations are extraordinarily rare in papal history, and the timing raised questions. Benedict stepped down amid growing pressure from scandals, leaks, and internal opposition. Some Vatican watchers believe he was pushed out, not physically, but politically. That alone shattered centuries of tradition. Then there is the Vatican's unexplained wealth. Despite being the smallest sovereign state on earth, the Vatican owns vast amounts of real estate across Europe, holds priceless artifacts, and maintains opaque investment structures. Attempts to audit Vatican finances repeatedly stall or end quietly. External oversight is minimal. Internal investigations often disappear without public conclusions. Even reform-minded popes have struggled to penetrate the system. Officials tasked with cleaning up corruption have been removed, reassigned, or sidelined. Some have spoken anonymously about resistance so entrenched that meaningful reform is nearly impossible. And then there are the deaths. Several high-ranking Vatican officials over the years have died under circumstances that fueled speculation: sudden illnesses, accidents, unexplained collapses. While no conclusive evidence of wrongdoing has been proven, the pattern has kept rumors alive that certain knowledge comes with consequences. One particularly strange case involved a Vatican Guard member found dead inside Vatican City. Official explanations were offered quickly. Investigations were closed. But inconsistencies in the timeline and evidence left lingering doubts that were never publicly addressed. Modern secrecy doesn't only involve people, it involves information. In the digital age, the Vatican has aggressively controlled data. Internal communications are compartmentalized. Cybersecurity is treated as a matter of state defense. Whistleblowers are dealt with quietly, and leaks are punished swiftly. This has led some analysts to argue that the Vatican is less transparent now than it was decades ago, not because it has more to hide, but because it has learned how to hide better. There is also growing attention on the Vatican's role in global politics. Though officially neutral, the Holy See maintains diplomatic relations with most of the world's nations. It influences policy on abortion, education, marriage, and humanitarian aid. Behind closed doors, Vatican diplomats are active in negotiations few people ever hear about. Some critics believe the Vatican uses its moral authority as leverage, shaping outcomes while avoiding accountability. Others argue this influence is necessary to maintain global stability. Either way, much of this activity happens far from public view. And then there is the question of succession. Every papal election is conducted in total secrecy. No recordings, no transcripts, no external observers. What happens inside the conclave stays inside the conclave, permanently. Alliances are formed. Deals are suspected. Votes shift. Once a pope is chosen, the story becomes official history. But the process itself remains untouchable. In an era where transparency is demanded from nearly every institution, the Vatican stands apart, protected by tradition, sovereignty, and faith. To believers, this is sacred. To critics, it is dangerous, because secrecy, when combined with power, invites abuse. The Vatican insists it is changing, that reforms are ongoing, that mistakes are being acknowledged. And in some ways, that may be true. But for those watching closely, the pattern remains familiar: revelation, denial, partial disclosure, and silence. The archives open slowly. The statements are carefully worded. The truth is released in fragments, never whole. And so the question persists: are the Vatican's secrets exaggerated by centuries of suspicion? Or is the truth simply buried under layers of time, power, and silence? As more documents emerge, historians hope to finally separate myth from reality. But even now, many believe the most important records will never be released. In the end, the question is not whether the Vatican has secrets. Every institution that has survived for 2,000 years does. The real question is what those secrets protect, because once revealed, they wouldn't simply challenge faith or tradition. They would expose how power has truly operated behind the walls of the world's smallest and most secretive state, not through miracles or doctrine, but through influence, wealth, diplomacy, and silence. As archives slowly open, historians may uncover fragments of the truth, but some documents may never be released, not because they are false, but because they are too revealing. And history, once fully exposed, cannot be controlled. That may be why the Vatican's greatest secrets remain exactly where they are: preserved, guarded, and untouched by time. Hidden. Thank you for watching. If you found this investigation insightful, consider liking the video, sharing it, and subscribing for more deep dives into the world's most guarded histories.